Today I'm going to tell you the story of two different entrepreneurs whose delay cost them an 8-figure sum and how they can use my system to put more money from their business back into their pocket. This is the formula that any business owner can use to keep more money in their pocket long term. And this dotted line is the one that you want to pay attention to, because everyone starts a business or buys a stock or buys a cryptocurrency. They enter into some kind of business or investment, and eventually you may sell that. This dotted line is what makes the difference. And I'm going to tell you a story about two different Nomad Capitalist clients, each who hired us multiple times, and the delay in not executing actually cost them over $10 million each. So here's how it works. If you live in a high-tax country, when you start your business or buy into an investment is when the clock starts ticking. If you start a business, ostensibly it's worth nothing the day you start it. But every day that goes on, you start developing intellectual property. You have sales. Your business has some kind of valuation. So for every day that you stay in your country's tax system, as long as your business becomes profitable, you're basically moving this dotted line up. And that's what happened to both the clients I'm going to talk to you about. Let me start with the first gentleman. This person actually worked with us on, I think, more than 2 different occasions over the years. And so he's an American. He did not want to move to Puerto Rico, which is one way to basically stall the capital gains tax on your business. Because you start a business, it's worth nothing. Let's say you sell it. In his case, eventually got sold for about $50 million. And so he could have left down here when he first called us, when the business was about $7 million. Now, obviously, business valuations are more of an art than a science in many cases, but we thought the business was worth about $7 million. Those were his numbers. So between $50 million and here's zero, right? You're buying in. You have no capital gain. So either the business is worth nothing or your capital gain on a stock or a cryptocurrency or whatever else is zero. So between this 0 and 50, he could have left here at this $7 million mark and actually paid very, very little in tax because of some offers that he had available to him. And so he basically had 2 different options to leave at the $7 million point. He could have moved to Puerto Rico, which is more of a time system. So the longer your business is run from Puerto Rico, the more money you save eventually. Or he could have given up his U.S. citizenship and moved anywhere else in the world to a tax-friendly country. We've helped clients move to 31 different tax-friendly countries. It's a one-stop shop. So he had 2 different options. He did not want to move to Puerto Rico, but his business was unique in that it was growing at kind of the same rate, a rather linear rate. And so Puerto Rico with the time method, renunciation with a value method would have worked in a relatively similar way. If you're not an American, you simply want to leave your country's tax system to where you would simply move to some other country but keep your passport. So you've got all the options, not just Puerto Rico or giving up your citizenship. But nevertheless, if you leave, $7 million is the number where there may be an exit tax. Every country works a little bit differently in this regard. But again, in his case, the exit tax wouldn't have been that bad because it basically would have been an unrealized capital gains tax from 0 to 7 million. You get some exemptions off of that, and he had some additional exemptions he could have thrown at that. So basically, when he first came to us, we advised him on a second passport that he ended up getting in about 6 months. Then he came back, something like, $19 million. And so each time you keep going up, the difference is here. So the difference between 15 million and 19 million, that's $31 million. So let's just say capital gains tax on a business where you live is 25%. So a wee little bit less than that for most folks in the US, but we're talking a little less than about $8 million. So right now, if you would have said, okay, the second time I'm coming to you, I'm going to follow the advice. Now I'm at 19 million. Hey, I just saved myself it's not 18, it's $8 million. If you would have done it from here to here, again, he had some special incentives in his particular case, but we're talking 43 million. I mean, now we're talking closer to like 10 or 11 million dollars for many people. Could be a little bit different, but the difference there is pretty substantial. What ultimately happened was, came back like right up here at the last minute where it's like, hey, I'm about to go into negotiations with different people to sell the business for $50 million. And it came down to a situation where, let me just, for purposes of illustration, show you the difference. I mean, it was literally this difference. And we worked with a whole bunch of different tax lawyers. and figured out a way where like, all right, if you do this, here's kind of a really weird exception, kind of a loophole almost, where you can go and you can save $500,000 and you've got to change your lifestyle for a year. But hey, for me, if I'm an entrepreneur, I want to hire the company that has the most number of options of places that I can move to, the most number of experts and lawyers and accountants on that work with them, their network, the most number of different passports I can get, the most number of different everything, as long as I'm getting an ROI. So even if he waited till the very end, which he ultimately did, hey, here's a way to save $500,000 and change is what it was. His ROI after, coming multiple times and not finishing was still something like, I don't know, it's like 8x or something. He could have left down here and basically 20x'd this savings, and it wouldn't have been quite as involved, because at this point, he's like, I'm already starting to get into negotiations. And so by waiting until the business has a very formal value, you're kind of stuck with that valuation, and that's what the tax people had to work around. When your business is worth $7 million, a lot of entrepreneurs actually overvalue their business. And so someone with a business that they say, hey, it's worth 7, I might look at that, or a tax lawyer might look at that and say, like, dude, your business is really worth 4, which a lot of entrepreneurs push back on. But it's like, wait a second, that's $3 million less that you're going to pay in capital gains when you exit. You want to make this bracket as big as possible. And so ostensibly, if you are, let's say this guy starts the next business, he might want to come over here and just say, hey, you know what, the next one, I'm going to do it right from the beginning. Now, at Nomad Capitalist, if you're saying, hey, I'm starting my very first business, I've got, $10,000 to my name, probably not going to be the best engagement for us, because our goal is getting you the top ROI. Now, you say, listen, Andrew, I don't want to sell my business. And by the way, I would say that makes you a real entrepreneur, in my opinion. Everyone who builds a business at some point may think, hey, someone wants to buy this from me. But I think if you go into the business with the intention of selling, you're probably not going to build as good of a business. If you're a truly passionate entrepreneur, you're not building it to sell. You're building it because you want to hold it and you want to run it and you want to make a real difference. Let's say there comes a point when you're like, all right, now I'm making a lot of money and I want to move offshore. Let's go back to that again, exit tax. I erased it so I can put it right back up there. You may never want to sell, so this line may just go away. But the dotted line still moves, and the way the exit tax works is the government's going to say, whenever you leave, we're going to basically act as if your business was sold. So let me tell you the story of a second entrepreneur. This guy was making so much money. I mean, he was making in the 8 figures, maybe even multi-8 figures a year. And he's saying, oh my God, Andrew, I'm living in California. California, please. Making 8 figures, your life, it ain't worth it. There's beaches, there's girls in bikinis somewhere else, man. It's not worth the price. And so his issue is he raised a bunch of VC money from pretty flexible VCs to where they're like, hey, run your business where you want. We don't care. That is a problem with many VCs. They want the Delaware C Corp. They want you to stay. They want you to go and meet the other VCs because you're always raising money. He had no intention of selling the business, but he was going to have an exit tax when he just wanted to leave. It still would have cost him millions of dollars to exit. But at that time, he still owned the vast majority of the equity of the company. And so the idea was maybe he could have borrowed against that, or he could have just sold a bit of a slice of the equity. For tax purposes, you want to legally and correctly have a lower valuation. So he could have done that by owning still a lot of the shares when it was valued at $35 million. But he could have taken up another slice at a similar valuation, sold that, paid the $5 million exit tax. His wife said, I'll only move to Europe. So again, no Puerto Rico. His wife would not have given up her citizenship, but he said, listen, you know what? If I can get a citizenship in Europe, I'm willing to be out of the US because I'm just sick of this place. But guess what happened? Again, I think we did some stuff for him, like on the citizenship front, but then didn't make the move on the tax front because we couldn't agree with the wife and the family. And so the $5 million opportunity went away because guess what happened a couple years later? We raised the bar way up into the stratosphere. Now, okay, so this is 35 million valuation, 5 million to leave. Eventually sold off more of the stock. Stock got hot as a pistol, 300. Let me write that in big numbers here. It was something like $300 million. Now, listen, that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, look at Twitter, for example. Whatever you think about it, Fidelity, I believe, just wrote down their investment from, was the 45 $12-ish billion valuation to $15 billion. Stocks get written up and down all the time. But if you exit when your company, if you leave the United States when your company's $300 million valuation, now, I mean, the tax was going to be something like, $35 million. And it's like, I don't have all that liquidity. We reinvested in the business. That's going to be a big bite to where essentially you are trapped. Now, at this point, you're waiting for this $300 million to do what Twitter did, at least on Fidelity's books, and you're looking for it to go down so you can find an excuse to exit. But he was in a situation where now he's stuck. And so now, okay, he can move to Florida and he can kind of reduce his taxes a little bit. But the situation became where I was talking to one of the tax lawyers that was working on this, and they're just like, this guy, again, is his business to plummet, or he's just going to be stuck forever. It's going to be a whole complicated situation, all because he came, and what would have been a relatively easy exit, he just chose not to do. He got himself in a situation where he was trapped, and now he's just going to stay there, basically in the U.S. ecosystem, and keep paying 40 to 50% tax every year because he missed his chance to exit. This is why I say when you're in a high-tax country, you are going to be running your business inorganically at times where you're doing things to take tax deductions. Saw a guy on YouTube, I bought a private jet, and the rationale in part was, I get a great tax write-off. Do you need the private jet? I mean, I'd rather have all my money and decide if I want a private jet or not. You're going to do some stuff that's inorganic, but then you're going to keep running your business thinking you're operating organically. You're going to take the VC money. You're going to do the sales. And then one day you're going to find yourself in a position where it's too expensive for you to get out. He literally cannot move his business out of the United States because he can't or refuses to pay the huge price to pay, but he could have done it for 1/7 the price had he moved forward the first time. One of the things that's important to understand is there is a whole emotion behind this. If you're running a business, you think, hey, it's just analytical. What I've realized in our work with about 1,500 different people that we've served, as well as other people who come to our events, is we all have, as entrepreneurs, more emotion than we want to let on. He had emotional issues with his family that precluded this from happening. He had emotional issues about, now that it's just so much higher, forget it, I just give up. He almost felt resigned to just like, I can't fix this problem, I'm going to go bury my head in the sand. And so you want to work with someone, if you're an entrepreneur, who actually understands that and who makes an emotional context. There are people who watch these videos, these episodes, and they say, why do you have to tell stories? Just give me the facts. Just say Singapore. Singapore's the answer. But there's no context there. The context here were a lot of emotional decisions and a lot of hesitation that, yes, in this case, I could not help the guy with. And eventually it just came to, hey, now you're diversified, but you didn't make the move. We have learned over all these years of helping people how to cut through with entrepreneurs so that you actually make the move. And guess what? When you hire Nomad Capitalist, and we've helped people move to 31 different tax-friendly countries in just the last few years, and a few non-tax-friendly countries as well, but 31 tax-friendly countries, that means there's more options for you to go to. Guess what? You go to the guy who's like, I sell Dubai. If you decide, hey, you know what, I don't really want to go to Dubai, he's not going to sell you anything else. And maybe you go down the path where you don't go through with it. I've seen that firsthand. That's why, from my own experience, said, let's have the most options. Let's have an R&D team where we're always finding new countries that have tax incentives, including some that you would never think have tax incentives. People call us, I want to move to Dubai. Have you thought of these 5 other countries where you might pay just a wee little bit more? I've never thought they had a tax deal there. That's the power of working with a company that puts its full, 15 years of research experience into helping you solve what really is a numbers problem, but even bigger is an emotional problem. By the way, you don't even want to get to this point. The ideal point, again, would be just to start down, I'm starting my business from the right place. Most of us who already have a business, how do I get out earlier? I can tell you emotionally, if you move to a country just because, hey, I want to save some money on taxes, and you don't like that place, and you don't have a plan of where else you can go because you bought from someone who only sells you one country, you may regret it, not always, but you may regret it, and you may go back home and get yourself into this position. The number of people who don't have a backup for their plan, who then undo the plan, is relatively high. Save the money on the profits going up and put this extra money in your pocket by thinking ahead on exit.